Welcome to the Middle-Aged Man podcast, the only men's podcast that tries hard not to say, do the clocks change themselves or do I have to put them back an hour? Or bums and tums, that's not a video on the internet really. And yet we still want to be the best that we can be. Today's question for you to meditate on is, tell me, how am I supposed to live without you? Right, so today's guest is a man that is a therapist and a coach. A guide to take you by the hand to help you on your journey back to you. He draws upon his 10 plus years experience in mindfulness, childhood trauma work, complex PTSD, and 3 plus years working with Gaia Pollini, therapist and co-author of the Fuck It books. If you have not read the Fuck It books, go and read the Fuck It books. They are amazing. Now, his approach focuses heavily on the now and very little in the past. He's actually only ever interested in the question, what happened to you, rather than what's wrong with you. He also looks at the personal lies that you tell yourself every single day and what adaptive and coping strategies that you learn from an early age that drag around with you like a very, very big, heavy backpack. Plus, I also know that we're going to be talking about something that every middle-aged man dreads and how it's affected a man that, in fairness, should have every tool in the toolbox to deal with it. Gentlemen, today's guest on the Middle-Aged Man podcast is Mr. John Imondi. How are you, John, my friend?
I'm not too bad, thank you. And thanks for the introduction. I was getting emotional when I was listening to that.
Really? That's really kind of you. Half of it you wrote, so I wouldn't get that emotional about it.
I did wonder.
Mate, let's... before we get on to the thing that I think is so important, I think, and not that anything else that you do is not important. Tell us about your work with guys and some of the tools that you've used to help middle-aged guys like me get over our shit and stop telling ourselves lies.
Yeah, so I think just going back a little bit before that, my profession was IT, so I worked in the IT industry for a number of years and was deeply unhappy with the job and also myself. Many struggles, frustrations, anger, insecurities. I think probably a lot of the things that quite a few men in their 20s probably identify with quite strongly. It got to a point, I think I could probably pinpoint it to a failed relationship. Again, I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Yeah, you and me have got something very much in common with that, I'm afraid.
There you go. And yeah, it kind of sent me spiraling, but in a good way. I'd kind of had enough and then started to devour all the self-help books that I could. Mm-hmm. Got into mindfulness meditation, which helped massively. And I kind of go all in with stuff. I obsess, good and bad. And I did with meditation, and for sort of 3 to 6 months, the most blissed out, peaceful person you could ever meet. I mean, I was really happy, really content. I'd made peace with my own mortality, even, death, anything like that didn't scare me. But there was still kind of ripples underneath. There was still a lot of things that I was afraid of, I was scared of, feelings and emotions that I couldn't quite explain. Mm-hmm. And I think the issue when you look at mindfulness and meditation, it can become a kind of filter almost. We develop mechanisms to protect ourselves from the pain, from going anywhere that's too difficult to go, to explore emotions that are too painful. And meditation can be the same. I always joke about yoga, and this isn't to offend the yoga community, but yoga is a classic example of that kind of spirituality, which is almost a mask to something that's deeper. So, yeah, I knew almost instinctively, I guess, that I still wasn't truly healed. And I'm going to do that in speech marks because I don't know if we ever are from this stuff. Stumbled across a book called Fuck It, The Ultimate Spiritual Way, by a guy called John C. Parkin. I went on a retreat. His wife happened to be there. First time they'd taught together in years, and she's a therapist. Long story short, I had a one-to-one session with her, completely changed my life, and kind of sent me down a path of becoming a therapist myself. And
In what way?
helping others.
In what way did it? I mean, I love the Fuck It books. I absolutely adore the Fuck It books. I've read them cover to cover several times. And it would be fair to say that I'm probably very slow on taking on board some of the teachings in there. But in what way did that one? How did that one-to-one session really, apart from obviously putting you on the road to becoming a therapist yourself, how did it change you? How did it just sort of like go, knock you off your feet and go, fucking hell, wow, this is something amazing?
Yeah, and that's literally what happened, because I walked out. So this took place in Italy, so on a retreat with John C. Parkin and his wife Gaia Pollini, who's Italian, hence the name. And the scenery was stunning. We're in a 17th century villa overlooking the Adriatic, so the scene was set. But when I walked out of the session, I'll tell you what happened in a sec. But when I walked out, people literally said, "What the hell happened to you in there?" Because I came out, kind of stood straight, a confidence, just an air of something that had shifted, which I wasn't expecting. Yeah. Now, in terms of what actually happened, and it's still kind of, the memory of it still chokes me, because I'd never experienced anything like it before. Now, I'd had therapy in my 20s, which is what people may recognize CBT. Mm-hmm. So cognitive behavioral therapy, which very much looks at behavior. So I might come to a therapist for CBT with a drinking problem, for example, and they'll try and look at the behavior of drinking, alcoholism, as opposed to the root cause, what actually causes the alcoholism or causes the destructive behavior or the addiction.
Yeah.
And this is the sort of thing that Gaia did. Now, as I said, I had no expectations going into it. But long story short, a lot of childhood stuff came up for me.
Right.
And it sounds crazy when you explain it, but when I was sat there, Gaia was just kind of more of a guide than a therapist. So it's not questions. I always say it's not like an intellectual thing. This is a kind of mind-body. Mm-hmm. A lot of trauma gets stored in the body. That kind of, shoulders tense, anger and frustration. And I ended up having a conversation, and not all sessions go this way, but with what I saw as my 7-year-old self, and almost just there was a point where I was apologizing to him for being such a failure and a letdown and not being there for him.
Does that still hurt?
And I remember Guy saying to me, and that's the easiest way to explain it, as that's kind of childhood feelings. But in that moment, you just feel, and I felt like a young, helpless boy in that moment. And as you go through that kind of energy shifts and something moves within you, you kind of work through that trauma. You're energetically, I guess, dealing with it as opposed to cognitively. Mm-hmm. So it's not a thought process. It's mind, body, soul, spirit, whatever you want to call it, just suddenly align. And it moves through you, this stuff that you've kind of kept suppressed and shut down for so long. And yeah, in my head, I could see him, and weirdly, we were kind of on the end of a pier at the one, and I was just kind of held him, and it was just absolutely, it was like a reconnection with a part of me that I'd abandoned, I guess. And yeah, a huge shift.
Does that conversation with your 7-year-old self? And you mentioned the word failure, and I think a lot of guys will understand that. Me especially. Does that conversation still hurt? Because I can't imagine it. I couldn't imagine. Yeah, it might have been life changing, but I can't imagine it being an uplifting conversation in any shape or form. But does that conversation still hurt where you said those words?
Yeah, it's interesting you say it's not uplifting. So there's an element to it that, because I guess now I can look back with hindsight and know that it's exploratory. So this stuff is very much about, and I think this is true for all our emotions, just be curious. A lot of it is too painful to go to for so many reasons. But if you can just hold that element of curiosity around them, why am I feeling this? Why is this coming up? And that's quite powerful. But yeah, to your question, why? So, I think you said, was it difficult? It was strange. It was weird. It felt new.
Okay.
And painful, but also quite liberating. There was a part of me again that kind of, and I'll say again, there's an I think we all have an intuition, and it just felt like this was kind of soothing. This was healing in some way. I didn't understand at that time how or why, but in that moment, yeah, it felt. Obviously, there were there were tears just flooding,
yeah, and
then euphoria, and I mean that literally. It felt like I was completely lost and helpless, and I'd cry for a couple of minutes, and then it was like waves, and then I'd feel euphoric for releasing something, and then something else would come, something else painful, and then the tears, and then oh my God, I've let that go now, and I remember describing it at the time at the end of the session that we had, self and Gaia. It reminded me like, when you get a spider in a glass.
Yeah.
You've caught the spider, you turn the glass back upside down, and the spider's kind of clambering to try and get out the glass. That's what my mind was like. My mind was trying to think. It was literally like, what the fuck's going on here? Unable to kind of grasp any thoughts. There was just nothing. There was just a kind of peace and calm and almost clarity in my mind.
So this session, obviously, you've got to work with them, and has led you down a path of becoming a therapist. Talk to us about how you went about that and what you did to do that.
Yeah, well, it was almost kind of chance, and sometimes everything aligns and things happen. Opportunities open up. I left that. This was back, 6-7 years ago. That experience, and a couple of months later, Gaia reached out to me and said, I paraphrase, but literally, there was something about you on the retreat. I do an apprenticeship. Would you be interested in joining? It's a 3-year training. And I was like, yeah, definitely sign me up. It basically meant I get to spend 2 weeks a year in Italy. So,
that is an added bonus,
yeah. And interestingly, my granddad was Italian, hence the surname. So there's a kind of it's interesting how life works out. But so I did that for 3 years, and as part of that, obviously, and I think this is the problem with a lot of therapy that's out there. A lot of therapists haven't done the work, and I've always said that a therapist can only take you as far as you're prepared to go. So there's something called counter-transference. So if you and I were in a session and you were talking about something quite painful for you, and I recognize that in me, there's a chance, and I've not worked for it, there's a chance that I could basically freak out. So that was really powerful for me. And then after that, I then trained in what Gaia trained in, something called NARM, which is the neuroaffective relational model,
right,
which is effectively the developmental trauma side of things. And in short, because it's obviously a massive topic, NARM, onto NARM. And so NARM deals with developmental trauma. So it's the neuroaffective relational model. And it's the stuff that happens to us as children. So actually they argue now that in the womb, so if you've got a mother who's an alcoholic, suffers with depression, anxiety, there's a lot of evidence now that suggests that actually affects the development of the unborn child when you're in the womb. But anyway, from 0 months to about 10 years of age, there are core needs that we all need. And, we're talking outside of food, shelter. And if we don't get those for whatever reason, it then becomes, we detach, so we disconnect and we develop adaptive mechanisms into our adult lives. Wow. That as an adult no longer actually serves us.
Yeah. And effectively, we all tell ourselves lies, and it's so interesting about trauma and trying to pinpoint things that have affected you and have caused a rock to just keep sort of like rolling down the hill. I've been doing an awful lot of work myself through No More Mr. Nice Guy. There were things that book just absolutely sung to me, and I think that with the podcast as it is at the moment, this is me trying to help other guys just realize that, you know what, we're not all great, we're not all insane, we're not all stupid, but we're not on the scrap heap either. But I think it's amazing that you've obviously gone through that transformational meeting, and you've basically just got back into it. You're giving back, you're paying forward by the work that you're doing. And I do believe that there is a case for it's like life coaches. I always used to, as an ex-business coach, I always used to just joke about business coaches that couldn't coach businesses because they'd never run one themselves. They'd read a book, but they'd never run a business. And it's like, the 25-year-old life coach. Yeah, dude, you're not going to help, a 40-something like me. You haven't lived life yet. You've just sort of like, you've had your first girlfriend, she broke your heart, that's it. Actually, guess what? My relationship was slightly more complex than you will ever get through. So I guess it sort of like falls to us to talk about, there's a bit of an elephant in the room. And I know you've told me, and you're amongst friends on this podcast. Look, tell us what's happened to you recently that, to be fair, is going to floor pretty much every bloke that's listening to this.
Yeah. So last year, I had a number of health issues going on for several months, fatigue, and I just thought I was just unhappy, tiredness, just like you can't imagine. By about 5 o'clock in the evening, I was ready for bed. Some stomach cramps, just strange symptoms that you, looking back now, kind of obvious what it was, but just strange symptoms that would come and go so sporadically that I urge people now not to ignore. That I didn't put two and two together, but it transpired. I found out on the 6th of December after a colonoscopy that I had colon cancer, bowel cancer. They found, I've never found out the size of that tumour, but the surgeon after the colonoscopy basically said it needs to come out now. Generally what they'll do is they'll test it for the histology and the genetics to find out the type of cancer, and but he said we haven't got time. Yeah, so I had a quite a sizable tumour in the left side of my colon.
What was your initial reaction to that? I know that sounds a stupid question. I'm so sorry, but it's
no.
As somebody with as a therapist with all the tools, and this is the thing about, I think a lot of guys look at therapy and look at counsellors and things like that, and they kind of go, oh, they've got it all sorted, they're absolutely, their heads are screwed on. And I know for a fact
we're the craziest. You're
the craziest bastards going. You really are. So, just how the fuck did you react to that, man?
It was strange because it was after the colonoscopy, and I was sat there on the bed recovering. And for anyone who's not had a colonoscopy, I also had a gastroscopy. I always get that one wrong. It's basically a camera down the throat.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
A gastroscopy. Yeah. And then colonoscopy is a camera up the bum.
Yeah.
And it was after I had both, and the clinician. The nurse basically said, they want to talk to you. And I sort of thought, at that moment, I was like, if they hadn't found something, then they wouldn't want to speak to me immediately after. Mm-hmm. And this moment is kind of etched in my brain. And I think every time I think about it and talk about it, it chokes me, because we sat down with my partner, she and I were sat there, and he said, look, we couldn't complete the procedure. He said we could only get the camera soaked. It was literally just not even barely 10% into my colon. He said we couldn't get the camera past the last. He said it was a tumour. He said it's cancer. And in that moment, it felt like there was everything in me just saying, don't be upset. There's this pride not to show emotion, even as you say, a therapist, there's a part of me that wants to kind of stiff up a lip. Oh, okay. And yeah, that moment, and I just let that go, and I just cried. Yeah.
If it makes you feel any better, which I'm sure it won't, I've had those very similar tests in the last few weeks. On my own.
Really?
I can just imagine. I'm still waiting for some results, but I can imagine. I can just imagine that was it pain? Was it grief? What was it? I'm still not sure what to kind of expect myself if I get told the worst, if that makes sense.
It was, and hope, fingers crossed for you. Your results come back clear. Do you know, I think I wrote about it in a blog recently, and I can only describe it as it was everything. It was, and it was a short, literally, I mean, I don't know how long I cried for until I thought, let's get it together for a minute. But it felt like tears for what life I may have left. Obviously, in that moment, I don't know if I've got 6 months to live, 6 years. Tears for my partner who's sat there, tears for me who's now got to go through it, tears for the unknown, tears for the dreams I had and are kind of potentially taken away from. In that moment, it felt like, people say before they die, their life flashes before them.
Yeah.
It was almost like that, but not in a euphoric way, in a kind of just, I can't truly describe it, but you're on this path that, although people have walked it, you're very much alone. No matter how many people are with you, you're alone through this.
What's the prognosis?
So I had surgery on the 22nd of December, 22.
Last year. Happy Christmas, Jesus! Right, okay.
Yeah, I was in hospital over Christmas.
Wow. Okay.
I couldn't eat. I had my Christmas dinner was tomato soup.
Okay. Well,
But the surgery.
Some people have had worse. I won't worry.
Exactly. I can't complain. I'd had a tumour removed as well, so it saved my life. So I was kind of it's not a bad Christmas present.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, the surgery was successful. So there was a lot of unknowns as well when I went into surgery. They wanted to. They gave me two options. They said we can either what they wanted to do if they had their choice, and I mean the surgeons, is remove my entire colon, large colon. Mm-hmm. I won't get into a biology lesson, but leave me without a large intestine. The logic behind that is I'm young or younger, and that'll stop colon cancer ever coming back, so I won't have a colon.
Yeah.
Or they just cut out the tumour in the part of colon that's there, reattach it. Might end up with a stoma. Might not. There was a lot of unknowns. Mm-hmm. And anyway, I said, we'll just cut out the tumour. It makes no sense for me to cut out all the healthy colon, which they did. Unfortunately, that all went well. They managed to reattach it, so I didn't have to have a bag. I then found out another kicker. About a month later, I've got Lynch syndrome, which I'd never heard of.
No, I've never
Lynch
heard of
syndrome
that,
is a genetic. No one has, and it's quite common, weirdly. But the problem is, you only generally find out if somebody in your family's got it. It's hereditary, right. Genetic, or you've had cancer, because they test you for it when they do the genetics of the tumor. And a Lynch syndrome basically is genetic fault, and if you think of your cells have a kind of spell checker facility, so when DNA replicates, the genetics will check to make sure they're good copies and then allow them. Mm-hmm. In my body, that kind of spell checker doesn't work, so it allows faulty genes to replicate,
right,
which causes a tumour. Which basically means I'm between 15 and 80% more likely to have cancer.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, wide ranging, but yeah, there are some people with Lynch syndrome that never get it. Some people obviously do. But as it stands, and it's probably worth mentioning that I was told, now this is the NHS, different. I think I'd be told differently if it's in the States, but they said, we strongly recommend you have 6 months of chemotherapy.
Wow.
Because I've got Lynch.
Yeah.
And basically as a mop-up. So as far as they could tell, the tumour's been removed. So it hadn't spread. It's worth saying, so it hadn't spread to any of my other organs.
Okay.
Which is, of course, good news.
Well, yes.
Yeah, but I won't go into, probably haven't got time now, but I'm not going down the chemotherapy route. But it was strongly advised that I did.
Okay, so you have got the time. So I'm going to ask it because these are look. Here's the thing: these are decisions that other guys will have to make. Mm. It's like, may I ask why? Why you've not decided to do that?
Yeah, so and I didn't make this decision lightly. Mm-hmm. I'd mentioned it before with my session with Gaia and all the work that I've done on myself and with others. I think we have an intuition, a gut feeling, whatever you want to call it, and we know when things are true. Now, unfortunately, I think a lot of the time that's clouded by the mental chatter. I think we can talk ourselves out of things, fear, and all the rest of it. With all the work that I've done over the years, gut feeling, sometimes it screams at me, it shouts, and I can't ignore it. I also am a big believer that my cancer, I called it Colin. So Colin, my cancer, it wasn't a
Colin the colon cancer, right? Okay, there we go, right.
Yeah, bit of alliteration.
I'm sure there's a children's book in that, but that'd be the weirdest one ever. But apart from that,
if I write that now, you can't. Yeah,
that's fine. No.
He didn't want to be there. This was something beyond. This was a creation of neglect, of me ignoring my body, of me ignoring my basic needs, of me ignoring my happiness. And the 12 months that led up to it, I knew what I was doing wrong. I wasn't looking after myself. And even as a therapist, again, and I'm talking nutrition, mental, every aspect of my life. Mm-hmm. Deeply unhappy. So I know that and the nurses and doctors told me, no, you're not to blame. For me, it's not about blame. It's what caused it. And to me, that is what caused it. So poor diet, exercise, not looking after my mental health. So I know what 100% for me, that's what caused the cancer. So when the option, I guess, and it was quite interesting when I was sat with the oncology, because they went through it and they said, right, we want to give you capecitabine, which is a chemotherapy tablet. Mm-hmm. And they said, this will give you 27% benefit. And I found it really interesting they used the word benefit. And they said, and also we want to give you oxaliplatin, which is an IV drug as well. And that'll give you an extra 7% benefit. And at the end of the conversation, she kind of handed a form over to me for my, what's the word I'm looking for?
Prescription.
Sign my life away. The consent. The consent form.
Yeah, sorry, consent.
Yeah, and I was like, "Well, this assumption that you've got cancer, you've had cancer, you'll do chemotherapy." No, and I'd done a hell of a lot of research in the couple of months leading up to that. When I found out I had cancer and everything else around nutrition, health, all the foods that are really, really potent to prevent cancer, and also, I won't use the word cure, but mm-hmm. Treat, let's say. And in my mind, it wasn't a question. And my whole body was just in complete agreement. Chemotherapy, such a toxic, carcinogenic drug. When you look into, chemotherapy drugs, and I'm not saying that this is for everyone. Do your own research, but just do your research and look into it. because chemotherapy, there's a lot of studies that could cause secondary cancers. It strips you of your immune system. And when she reeled off the side effects, it's no joke. And I just thought, it's not for me. I can do this through therapy, through nutrition, through exercise. And it was, I got questioned a lot by the NHS and the doctors and nurses, but it felt like the right decision. And worth saying, so I radically changed my diet, and I feel better than I have done in years.
Okay.
From that alone.
That's good. No, that's great. There's another question that I want to ask, and I hope it's not too personal. How's your partner been throughout the whole of this? Because it's very easy to talk about ourselves all the time, and we do. But obviously, you've got an amazing partner. How has she dealt with it?
Yeah, wow. I mean, she's been incredible. And I find myself often questioning how I would have been without her. I mean, we're fortunate that our hospital's 10-minute drive up the road. Now, I knew she'd come and see me every day when I was in hospital, but she came to see me 3 times a day. She looked after me. Obviously, after the surgery, it was major bowel surgery, so I literally could barely move. She cooked all the meals, looked after the dogs. We don't have kids. I'm going to say fortunately, and by that I mean because they haven't had to go through it all. That's not an added pressure for Vicky, my partner. She's been incredible, absolutely incredible. Yeah, I owe her my life in part because, and I probably haven't expressed that enough to her.
I think she
probably
knows, dude. I've got to be honest. I think just the way you're talking about this is.
Honestly,
I'm interviewing you, and I'm struggling to hold this together. I've got to be honest. I've got a feeling that she knows, but it's it is one of those things that I think that partners don't realise the impact they have on their guys, on their fellas. And I know that from personal experience is that, I don't think that Natalie knew quite the impact that she had upon me. And unfortunately she won't now know how much impact that she had upon me at all. But I think that if your partner Vicky is listening to this at some point, I'm sure you might play it back to her. I'm a random stranger who also used to live in Worcester, by the way. So, literally, when you said 10 minutes, I left Worcester about 7 years ago. So, when you said about 10 minutes away, I know the radius of that. And, I was probably in the same radius as you. And Worcester Hospital is very, very good. It has to be said. Incredibly underfunded, but very good nonetheless.
Yeah.
Let's just move it on because I don't want you beating yourself up, to be perfectly honest. If you could go back to your 25-year-old self, and it's a question I always ask.
Yeah.
What's the one bit of advice that you wished you'd given yourself at the age of 25?
I don't think I'd give him advice. And this might sound like a cop-out. So I apologise.
No, it's not. No, of course it's not a cop-out. Why would it be a cop-out? Not at all.
I think all I'd want to say to him is it's going to be okay.
Okay.
And I know how angry and frustrated and insecure that my 25-year-old self was. And I know how I think probably daily he wished that things would be different. And I can feel the emotion, so it seems true.
Is that because you sort of like you look back and sort of like and you're now thinking that I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but if you hadn't have had those experiences, if you hadn't have felt that frustration, if you hadn't have felt that anger, you wouldn't be the person you are today.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to change the course of his journey. And this isn't a kind of don't have regrets thing. This is a, it did work out. And I think I had to go through all of that. I still think that, just going back to the cancer, and I wrote a blog about this, cancer's been my greatest teacher because it's taught me about self-care again. But equally, that 25-year-old was lost. So all I'd want to do is reassure them and just say, it's going to be okay. Sucks that it's not going to be okay in the next few days. But once you get past your 30s, you're going to be all right. And interestingly, that was the same thing that I said to my 7-year-old self in the session I had with Gaia, the first ever session. And I think there's a quality and okayness that we don't always appreciate. I think with the highs and lows of life, actually okay is more than good enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, the next question is always from the previous guest, so I don't get to see this until I click on it, and I've just seen it. The question is, when you feel at your worst, what is the one experience, the one day, the one moment that you always go back to and remember the fondest?
For me, so I'm a massive fan of wild camping.
Right. Okay.
Hammock, specifically hammock camping. So I'll go off to woodland with my hammock and rig it up between two trees, tarp over the top in case it rains. And I would say that is the most beautiful thing that I get to do in my life. And of course, there's moments I share with my partner Vicky, but I appreciate the power of connection. I think we all need connection with each other and other people. I think we're designed for that. But also, I think alone time, being able to reflect is incredibly. There's not one single time that I've spent, in the woods in my hammock, but that is my place where I can reflect and take stock and just be me and just get back to nature. That act of, brewing a coffee over a stove. Honestly, I'm not just saying it's like heaven to me. That is the one place I feel most at peace. All that chatter is gone. It's just me, usually some noisy pheasants. But yeah,
especially in Worcester, there's an awful lot of noisy pheasants. Yeah, you're right. Bloody things.
Yeah, the noise, it's crazy. Yeah, it's mad. Yeah, Google pheasants.
I'm in Leicestershire. I'm yet to see a pheasant in Leicestershire. Honestly, couldn't bloody move for the in Worcestershire. Seriously.
Yeah, they're everywhere. But yeah, it's got to be that when I'm in my hammock in the woods.
And it did sound incredibly middle class. I realised halfway through that sentence that I was talking about pheasants. It sounded so bloody middle class. It was unbelievable. It really was. It was like, talking about pheasants. There are people in London going, what the fuck?
I've got the image of you with your flat cap on and your,
Yeah, I've got those. Don't worry about that. Look, John, this has been brilliant, honestly. And all I can say is you're an inspiration to me. You are a true gentleman, a very honest gentleman. Can we really genuinely just keep up to date with you with your story and what's going on with you as you fight back, so to speak?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I created off the back of this a website where I blog and do various other things, which is called diaryofacancersurvivor.com.
Okay, well, I'll put the links into the show notes.
Yeah, I've done all the socials and things, so I'm doing kind of updates and bits and pieces. So yeah, definitely. I want to, as you've said, to share this stuff. And it's quite interesting, just quickly, the feedback that I get about sharing openly about my experience, that people are afraid to do that. I think there's shame and there's a lot of fear around cancer.
Yeah, there's
understandably.
I think as middle-aged guys, there's an awful lot of fear and shame about sharing bloody anything, to be perfectly honest. But when
very true, yeah.
It's it was the thing about sort of like not being okay. In our messages between us before we started recording, you sort of like you were interested in people in my sentence where I said it's okay not to be okay, and it's the amount of stigma there is around about men's mental health, and obviously perhaps I wear my heart on my sleeve a little bit too much regarding that, but actually it's a conversation that really needs to be had. And if I'm the guy that sticks his head above the parapet and gets shot at, fuck it, I don't care, because I think people don't quite understand when you get to a certain age the amount of baggage that you carry, and very much so. I enjoyed your phrase about sort of like being a very heavy rucksack. It's not necessarily a rucksack. It's also a case of suitcases and man bags and stuff like that we're carrying. And it's not until that an event opens it up that you realise how much you were carrying or how many traumas that you'd gone through, and you just went, I'm just being a man. It's all right. I can deal with this shit. So
and people suddenly realise that you can actually put them down.
Yes.
Yeah,
you can, and that's very definitely the journey that I'm going on. Finally, is that I'm starting to put those bags down. It's taken a while, but it needs to be done. It really needs to be done. So, John, we're gonna catch up with you, and trust me, when I finish hit recording, I know I'm coming down to Worcester in the next couple of weeks. So you and me, my friend, we're going for a beer or a green algae juice or whatever you're drinking. But
it will probably be the algae juice.
It'll be the algae juice, right? But I'm going to come down and we're going to sit and we're going to meet up and have tea and algae juice or whatever. All right. So a big thanks to John for sharing his life, his amazing story, and his thoughts. If you like the podcast, do us a favor. Go like, share, and subscribe. Look out for the extra solo shows that keep coming up as well. The previous one was about the brutal truths that I've learned about myself and life in the last 12 months. But review the podcast and be in with a shout of winning a 50 quid Amazon voucher that you can buy a weighted blanket with or spend on a Tony Robbins book or something. But we'll be back next week, and I will see you all very soon. Much love. Be brilliant. Go on. Kick off your shoes. It's been a long day. Kick off your shoes. It's been a long day.